Let's have a look at the pasuk again in Kedoshim. V'chisovoyu el ha'oretz, when you come to the land, unetatem kol eitz machol, and you plant any fruit tree, v'araltem arloses perioi, and you should consider its fruit to be orla. V'chisovoyu el ha'oretz, when you come to the land. It would appear that the Torah is telling us that this mitzvah applies in Eretz Yisrael. Says the Mishnah, Eis shebo avoseinu la'oretz. At the time that our forefathers came to Eretz Yisrael from the Midbar, led by Yeshua ben Nun, motzu notua, if they found a tree already planted, a fruit tree already planted, potter, it was potter from the mitzvah of Arla. So in other words, v'chisovoyu el ha'oretz is telling us not a geographical definition, but a chronological definition. It's telling us from when the mitzvah of Arla applied. Because in fact, as we will see in the very last Mishnah in the Mesechta, the mitzvah of Arla applies outside of Eretz Yisrael as well. There are some differences between the way the halacha is applied in Eretz Yisrael to the way it's applied in Chutz La'aretz, but essentially the mitzvah of Arla applies in Chutz La'aretz as well. So v'chisovoyu el ha'oretz is telling us from when you come to Eretz Yisrael, unetatem kol eitz machol, and you plant fruit trees. But motzu notua, if you found a fruit tree already planted by the Knaanim who were there, potter, it is potter from the mitzvah of Arla. Not netoi, afal pi, sheloi kipshu, chayav. The Mishnah is medayek, again, the Lashon v'chisovoyu. We know that when Klal Yisrael came to Eretz Yisrael, there were 7 years of kibush and 7 years of chalukah. It took 14 years until they were finally fully settled in Eretz Yisrael. However, the mitzvah of Arla applies from the very moment that they entered the land. Afal pi sheloi kipshu, even though they hadn't yet conquered the land, chayav, they were chayav in the mitzvah of Arla. As soon as they planted fruit there, in fact, says the Bartanura, bein Yisrael, bein Avdei Kechavim, whether it's Yisrael or a Goy, la'achar shebo la'oretz, afal pi sheloi kipshu, Yisrael es oretz chayav. And how do I know that it applies both whether the tree is planted by a Yid or a Goy? Says the Bartanura, this comes from the Gemara, the Yerushalmi, because the pasuk goes on to say, "Unetatem kol eitz machol," any tree, whether it's planted by Yisrael or an Avdei Kechavim. Hanoita l'rabim. If somebody plants a tree in his own private property, but l'tzayrech rabim, for the benefit of the general public, chayav, he's still chayav in the mitzvah of Arla. Rabbi Yehuda poiter, Rabbi Yehuda says he's potter. And the machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim here is as to how you learn the psukim. The Chachamim simply learn, it says in the pasuk, Shaloi sholim yeh lochem. From lochem we see that refers even to fruit. Lochem is a plural. Even to fruit, which are for the benefit of more than just the individual. Therefore the din of Arla applies. Rabbi Yehuda uses the principle of ein ribui achar ribui elo lemait, which means it's a little bit the opposite of the mathematical idea that a minus is a plus. There is in the limudim which we use, halacha l'Moshe Sinai, to learn halachas from psukim in the Torah, there is a limud called ribui achar ribui. Ein ribui achar ribui elo lemait means that when the pasuk uses 2 consecutive expressions of inclusion, expressions that appear like they are coming to include extra cases or extra dinim, in fact, if the pasuk does that twice consecutively, we are told that that teaches us that it's actually an exclusion rather than an inclusion. So Rabbi Yehuda says, if you look at the pasuk, there are 2 such ribuyim. It says unetatem, and you shall plant, in the plural, instead of natato. And it says lochem. So the pasuk seems to be telling us twice that this applies to fruit that are there for a rabbin. Says Rabbi Yehuda, therefore we learn, Ein ribui achar ribui elo l'mayit. The Chachamim, of course, agree to the principle of Ein ribui achar ribui elo l'mayit, but they simply hold that unatatem is not actually an inclusion of a rabbin. Unatatem, it's a plural expression speaking to every individual within a group. When you come into the land and you shall plant, everybody in Eretz Yisrael, every Yid who comes to Eretz Yisrael, has this din of Arla. And so therefore, there is only the pasuk of Lochem that teaches you that even if it's L'Rabbim, you are chayav in the mitzvah of Arla. There is a kasha here, which the Mefarshim discuss. I'll just say the kasha, which is, why should I have thought, according to the Chachamim, why should I have thought that if a person plants a fruit tree in his private property, but for the purpose of the Rabbim, that it should not have the din of Orla? Where do we find such a thing, that if a person does the Tzarech Rabbim, then the Chiyuv, or the Mitzvah, goes? We can be mine in the Melech Shloimeh and in the Mishnah Rishona for some clarification on this. Hanuitah Birshus HaRabbim. If somebody plants Birshus HaRabbim, so he's now planting a tree in Rishus HaRabbim, L'tzarech Atzmai, for his own purposes. V'ha'oived k'chavim shenota, or a guy who plants a tree in a field of Yisrael. V'ha'gazlan shenota, and a gazlan, somebody who steals a piece of land and plants. There is a discussion here as to whether we're talking about a gazlan who stole and the owner was then nisyayish. The Barantanura says he was nisyayish. Most of the other Mefarshim struggle to understand the Barantanura. In any event, a gazlan who steals a piece of land and plants a fruit tree in it. V'hanuitea bisfino, and somebody who plants a tree in a ship. I'll explain that in a moment. V'ha'oile me'elov, and a fruit tree that grows spontaneously of its own accord. And the Barantanura explains, and this comes from the Rambam, that that is dafka in a place of yishuv, in a place of settlement, but if it's in a place like forests and deserts, wild places, then it does not apply. Chayav Orlo, all these cases are chayav in Orlo. To explain Hanuitah Bisfino, I'll just preface it with the concept of Atzitz Nokuv and Atzitz She'ein Nokuv. A plant pot is an Atzitz. We have two kinds of Atzitz throughout Shas. We have an Atzitz Nokuv, Atzitz She'ein Nokuv. And it's applicable in many different areas of Halacha. An Atzitz Nokuv, a plant pot that has holes or perforations in the bottom, is considered to be connected to the ground. In fact, even if it is not actually touching the ground, even if it's suspended in the air, so long as there is no interruption, so long as there is nothing being mafsik between the bottom of the atzitz and the ground, it's considered that the atzitz is getting its yenika from the ground, it's still being nurtured from the ground, and it's considered connected to the ground. For example, therefore, in Hilchos Shabbos, if a person has an atzitz suspended over the ground, and he then puts a dova hamafsik between, it's like Meleches Koitzer, it's like he's stopping the yenika. Atzitz she'ein nokuv, atzitz which does not have holes in it, is not considered connected to the ground. Now therefore you would obviously expect that if you have a little fruit tree, a little orange tree in a plant pot, that if there are holes in it, it's connected to the ground, and the din of Arla applies. If there aren't holes in it, then it's not connected to the ground, and the din of Arla doesn't apply. A sfin or a ship, you would generally expect not to have holes in the bottom. Says the Mishnah, Hanuitah bisfino, even though it does not have holes in the bottom, chayav ba'orla. And the reason for that is that although, in order for an atzitz to be considered connected to the ground, it has to have holes in, there are certain materials that are porous. And even there are not actual holes, the very fabric of that material is such that it allows the yenika to come through from the ground. And one such material is cheres. And therefore here